The United States Air Force announcement that they will be acquiring the F-15EX raises many questions. Mainly, whether or not this move makes sense. It is therefore worth examining whether there are any rationale for the acquisition of the F-15EX and the validity of the statements that justify the decision. I have seen lots of videos about the F-15EX, many of which contain several inaccuracies. However, about 2 months ago, a video surfaced that far exceeded my tolerance threshold. It was far worse than what I have seen so far. There were so many factual mistakes and contradictions that it was hard to ignore. For this reason, the video will go through the statements made in that video. However, before we get started, it is worth getting familiar with the probable origin of some of the inaccurate statements. The infographic contains only a very few figures that are meaningful for comparison. Let's start with the technical parameters. The service ceiling of the fighter plane is not important. It does not provide any tactical advantage to fly at such high altitude. Like almost every parameter of a fighter plane, the service ceiling is highly dependent on the carriage stores for a non-stealth plane because they have large impact on drag. The displayed maximal speed of the F-15EX is completely inaccurate for several reasons. These will be presented in detail in the response of the cited video, as well as the airframe lifespan and operational cost. The 9G maximal overload value is also meaningless. Nor the F-35A or the F-15EX is able to push such a high G even for a short time at the most typical altitude of air combat. The combat performance is important, which cannot be described with a single value. Planes have characteristics. With increasing altitude, the absolute performance of the planes decreases because the engine thrust decreases with the increasing altitude. Despite the fact that the top speed of fighters is usually between 36 and 45,000 feet, the acceleration of fighters is less than it is in the subsonic speed range at sea level. At higher altitude, because of lower atmospheric pressure, the air density is also lower compared to the sea level. The turn rate with a given speed also decreases with increasing altitude. The maximal ordnance weight of the F-15EX is not accurate, and in fact it does not matter. In short, air combat is not a card game where a single higher value determines the winner. See the detailed explanation later. The combat range also cannot be described with a single value. It is heavily influenced by the external stores and mission profile. Without a defined mission profile in the exact loadout, doing a meaningful comparison is not possible. Perhaps the most and only useful part of the infographic is the detection range against the F-400 air defense system. These tracking range values are based on the publicly available data of the MFR fire control radar. It can track a 4 square meter radar cross-section target from 250 kilometers. The S-400 or any area denial capable surface-to-air missile system retains this capability against any non-stealth plane. Against the F-35 or any stealth plane, the area denial capability of the S-400 or any other long-range sense system is simply eliminated. Long-range engagements with fighters against stealth planes is impossible. About stealth, see the previously released material on the channel. Now it is time to fact-check the statements of the previously mentioned video.
This forced the Air Force to keep the old F-15 past its expiration date in order to maintain a fleet size large enough to respond to airspace violations in Europe and the Pacific at the same time.
The fleet sizes are not determined by the airspace violations. The fleet size is determined and planned in response to possible threats. Airspace enforcement is not a combat mission with wartime rules of engagement and threat environment. The F-15C Golden Eagle upgrade program was carried out to create a more advanced air superiority fighter for combat and not to respond to airspace violations. Peacetime airspace violations do not require very advanced fighter. For example, when Italy retired the F-104S starfighter planes, but the delivery of the Eurofighter Typhoon fighters was delayed, they leased Cold War era F-16 ADF planes. Advanced fighters are used for airspace policing because nobody uses dedicated fighters for this purpose.
So in order to solve this problem, the United States Air Force decided to order 104 of the new upgraded F-15EX multirole fighters.
Since the idea was announced in 2019, only 2 aircraft have been delivered. They are currently based at Eglin Air Force Base. The remaining 6 of the first batch of the 8 aircraft were scheduled to be delivered at the end of 2022, but production problems delayed this by more than 6 months. In the latest months were many times changed the number of ordered planes. First it was lowered to 80, then it was increased to 110. The fact that the order is changing continuously is not all surprising. The cut from 144 even to 80 is clearly indication that the Air Force does not feel the need to fill large number of F-15EX. More than a decade ago, the Air Force always protested against the cut of the F-22 Raptor production. The contrast is very sharp. Moreover, there are issues with the pricing of the plane, at least with the first batch. See the links in the description.
What this means is that it's able to perform as both a fighter and a bomber, except at a much lower cost than the F-35.
The F-15 has since the beginning been able to perform as fighter and bomber. It has just become more capable over time. The F-15A, B, C, D could use only dumb bombs, with one minor exception, the GBU-8, which could be used with a special pod. The F-15E has since its introduction received many precision-guided munitions and pods for different tasks and missions. The F-15EX does not bring any major new features compared to the existing F-15E of the United States Air Force. It already has a wide variety of weapons, and part of the fleet has already been upgraded to an ASL radar. Additionally, the lower operational cost of the F-15EX is not supported by any evidence. The per flight hour cost of an F-15E can be used as a basis from which to base our assessment on. The operational cost of an F-15E, which had less advanced avionics over 10 years ago, was in the $30,000 flight hour range. Why would an F-15EX with a more advanced avionics and upgraded engine be cheaper than any other US Air Force F-15 variant?
The sticker price on the new F-15EX will run you about $80 million.
As was mentioned, it is not clear what the price of the program is. The first public statement was about $1.5 billion for 8 airframes. That is $150 million per plane as a flyaway cost. The real flyaway cost of an F-15EX is therefore anything but lower than an S-35A, and the price of the targeting pods as well as the rest of the electronic suite is not included. See the explanation in the article from the breakingdefense.com, the link is in the description.
Modern stealth aircraft are designed for highly contested airspace. This means stealth was prioritized over everything else at the cost of speed, maneuverability, payload capacity, operational range, and operating costs.
This is simply false. Stealth was a demand, but it was not prioritized over everything else. It is also worth noting that the stealthy design can provide aerodynamic benefits, such as internal weapon bay, which reduces the parasitic drag. This is not mentioned in the original video. In fact, with a real air-to-ground combat loadout, non-stealth planes are essentially subsonic, while an S-35A can reach Mach 1.6 with two 2,000-pound GDAM or 8 small diameter bombs. An F-22 Raptor can loft the small diameter bomb or GDAM bombs vast distances, something the F-15EX could never do. The utilized speed of the S-35A is lower compared to the F-22, but is still better than the F-15EX. So much for the "stealth was prioritized over everything else" statement. The clean airframe has a positive impact on combat radius as well. Since parasitic drag is reduced, fuel consumption is also reduced, thus the operational range is increased. The clean, stealthy airframe provides less drag, which equals longer range. The impact of frictional and especially wave drag on the hardpoints and rails is a major factor that is often overlooked. An F-15E always carries a sniper pod, and it relies on drop tanks. For terrain following flight, the fleet pod with the terrain following radar is also needed.
The F-15 is a specific tool for a specific job. It excels at intercepting aircraft in areas that are in dispute in international territory.
Even the F-15E is a multirole plane. It is anything but a specific tool for a specific job. This strange statement just seems like a rhetorical trick to mask the very serious limitation and disadvantages of the F-15EX compared to a multirole stealth fighter. Airspace policing is not the same as combat interception or air patrol. The narrator just keeps saying that the F-15EX has an advantage in peacetime airspace policing, but never gets into the why or the how. This statement is not substantiated at all. Moreover, it is very disturbing that the terms like disputed and contested are poorly used. Disputed airspace or territory is a diplomatic issue. Contested airspace means that the enemy has the means to prevent actions of the opposing side. This term is used for a wartime environment.
Believe it or not, it was the push for upgrades by foreign nations like Israel and 6 other countries that essentially subsidized the cost of developing this model.
This is not entirely accurate. The countries listed did not directly fund the F-15EX as a project. The F-15EX is the result of a long evolutionary line. Every new piece of equipment and every feature which has been developed since 1990 was already paid for by a customer. The CFT was already developed for the F-15C, but it did not have any hardpoints for air-to-ground weapons. The F-15E got different CFT to be able to carry strike weapons, and it still can carry drop tanks. This was available from the beginning for the USAF Strike Eagles. The reinforced airframe was developed for the F-15E, which replaced the F-15Cs to deal with burden of the generally heavier loadout. The F-100GE 129 engine integration happened about 30 years ago. It was not funded by any of the listed countries. The further increased lifespan of the airframe was paid by South Korea when they ordered the F-15K variant. The fly-by-wire upgrade was requested by Saudi Arabia for the F-15SA. It was developed over 10 years ago. The F-15EX so far has not received the MAVS, the Missile Approach Warning System, but we can see where they would be installed. This was paid by for Singapore. It was the first F-15E sub-variant that received this self-defense equipment. The new cockpit and the world's fastest mission computer was designed for Qatar for the F-15QA variant. Boeing simply rebranded the export F-15E and now calls it F-15EX. The new F-15EX is nothing more than a renamed F-15SA or SG variant with a cockpit and mission computer from the QA variant. However, with less equipment because the planes still have not received the Missile Approach Warning System, and their price does not include the cost of the later mentioned pods like the Sniper or the Legion pods or the AWEPS. It is hard to justify that flyaway cost of the plane when every new feature it has been compared to the USAF F-15Es was paid for by a previous customer.
As an alternative for nations without these large military budgets, so they could still upgrade their existing fleet with a highly capable aircraft that won't break the bank.
How could the F-15EX be the cheaper alternative when it has a higher flyaway cost than the F-35A? The trend is clear. Any tender where the F-15A participated, it won over the non-stealth planes. The F-15EX clearly isn't much of an alternative to an F-35A. And just note on the margin, the older F-15E planes cannot be converted easily to EX because the Missile Approach Warning System needs the housing on the airframe. Moreover, the F-15E variants with Pratt & Whitney engines has totally different tail airframe section to the F-15EX.
This allows the fighter to top out at a speed of Mach 2.5 or 1,650 miles per hour, even at high altitude, faster than both the F-22 and F-35. In fact, this top speed makes the F-15EX the literal fastest fighter jet in the entire world.
No, it is not, because of several reasons. First, the top speed of the F-22 is classified, so this comparison is meaningless. The top speed of the F-15 is not Mach 2.5. In theory, a clean F-15EX without the CFTs on a cold day could maybe reach Mach 2.5 based on the performance envelope of the F-15A or F-15E. But that is a pointless thing because a plane without armament is useless. The top speed is never achieved for several reasons. Firstly, the geometry of air combat. Even if the F-15 carries only air-to-air missiles without CFT, it is essentially impossible to accelerate above Mach 1.4 in a real combat. There is simply no time and space for it. Accelerating a Pratt & Whitney-220 engine and CFT-equipped F-15E with 2/3 internal fuel, which carries 4+4 AIM-7 and AIM-9 missiles, At 40,000 feet, from Mach 0.8 to Mach 1.2 takes about 140 seconds, to Mach 1.3 220 seconds, and up to Mach 1.4 380 seconds. Even if you assume higher acceleration thanks to the about 50-20% stronger GE F110 engine and less drag thanks to the MRAM over the AIM-7, we are still talking about 180 seconds, 3 minutes just up to Mach 1.3. Only with 8 missiles and without the sniper pod to be equivalent with the EOT's equipped F-35A. If we add just the lantern, 2 pods, the acceleration from Mach 0.8 to Mach 1.2 increases from 140 to 240 seconds. It is 100% clear that no matter the stronger engine, the F-15EX is anything but the fastest fighter in the world with combat configuration. Even without pods, with just 8 missiles and CFTs, with an average speed of Mach 1, the 180 seconds acceleration needs 54 kilometers. In high-speed, high-altitude beyond visual range combat, both sides try to accelerate to as high speed as possible and climb to throw their missiles further. Assuming even long-range detection, non-stealth planes with much less drag than the F-15EX simply can't accelerate from subsonic speed over Mach 1.4 before they fly to each other's engagement envelope. Meanwhile, the F-22 can fly Mach 2 without even using its afterburner. Its Mach 1.78 supercruise speed is not a theoretical one, but it's an actual operational speed. With its impressively high thrust and low drag, the F-22 can accelerate rapidly compared to the 4th generation fighter planes. It is the same for the S-35A, but in this case the operational speed is only Mach 1.6. The Lightning is able to reach that speed even while carrying air-to-ground weapons. The F-15EX with drop tanks and air-to-ground weapons in practice is a subsonic plane. In reality, the maximum speed of the F-15 has always been limited by regulations. Even during functional check flight following a depot level maintenance, the F-15 family has always been limited to a top speed of Mach 2. The stated top speed of Mach 2.5 is a pure fantasy. It is prohibited by regulations, but with a combat configuration in a real combat scenario, it is simply impossible to reach even Mach 1.5. Therefore, stating that the F-15EX is the fastest fighter in the world is at best a grave factual error. In an actual combat configuration, even when just considering a pure air combat loadout without CFT and drop tanks, this is not true. Even if we imagine a scenario where the F-15EX is free to accelerate to its top speed, does not use CFTs and carries only 8 missiles, the result would be just that its range would become tiny. One more note regarding the often repeated interceptor term. The last interceptor designed in the US was the F-106 Delta Dagger. The F-15 is a multirole fighter which can take on both air-to-air or air-to-ground roles. High-speed interception is just one mission profile, but in that case the range is severely limited.
There is one important aspect to the F-15EX development that we need to keep in mind that explains why we need an upgraded interceptor to protect disputed airspace.
Again, peacetime's airspace policing is not a situation where the combat capabilities of the planes matter, because in airspace policing visual identification is mandatory. The planes rarely fly with a full missile loadout because it is pointless. Airspace policing is not a wartime scenario, no matter how much the narrator repeats this claim. To carry out airspace policing, you do not need a highly advanced and expensive 4th generation plane. But if it is the only plane in your fleet, you are at a serious handicap compared to stealth fighters in actual combat. This makes the F-15EX a terrible investment. The cost-benefit ratio compared to an S-35A is quite poor, because the survivability of the F-15EX, as well as its real combat potential, is inherently lower.
So the new F-15EX will be able to fire 12 air-to-air missiles at once from a new outboard missile stations on it. This is up from the previous ability to fire 8 missiles at once. The creator of the F-15EX at Boeing had previously stated that the fighter would actually be able to carry an insane 22 air-to-air weapons. However, we're not really sure if that capability will be adopted or if that's something that's going to be added in the future.
This is irrelevant in airspace policing scenario. Carrying more missiles just creates more drag and reduces range, acceleration and the top speed. These factors are simply ignored by this video. With 22 air-to-air missiles, the F-15EX would be a subsonic fighter. 22 missiles also would mean that drop tanks cannot be carried, which result in a very short range. What a magnificent fighter this would be. The F-15EX that is neither fast nor has the combat range.
The reason this is important is because the Chinese J-16 claims to be able to carry 12 missiles, so the Air Force is trying to double the amount of munitions as compared to its rival. This is what overmatch is all about.
Area engagements are decided by using missiles with larger engagement zones and not by carrying an unnecessarily high number of missiles, which restricts the flight performance. The point of a stealth plane is that it can launch missiles with a higher velocity because the initial speed and launch altitude is higher than a non-stealth plane, which has less acceleration and lower practical top speed. The cherry on top is that the stealth itself. Stealth aircraft can fly inside the kinematic range of opponents' air-to-air missiles without being detected. It is irrelevant that the F-15EX can carry 12 or 22 missiles if it is slower and essentially blind, because its detection range against stealth aircraft is in the 20-30 km range at best. If the only thing that mattered was the number of air-to-air missiles an aircraft carries, then the best fighter jet would be a Boeing 747 flying with a huge radar, which is obviously not the case. The same applies to an F-15EX with 10 or more MRAMs.
The F-15EX will also have the new ability to carry unconventionally sized munitions, most significantly of which is the hypersonic missile, which are as long as 22 feet in length, about 7,000 pounds each.
The US Air Force does not have any hypersonic missile currently, and it seems unlikely that any hypersonic weapons will enter service in the near future or at all. The hype surrounding hypersonic missiles would be worth another video just on its own, but more on that later. Promoting the F-15EX with a non-existent weapon is certainly an interesting strategy though. Even if the 7,000-pound hypersonic missile existed, it would make no sense to carry a strategic asset on a tactical plane. There are many good reasons why bombers and not fighters were used to carry the AGM-86 air-launched cruise missile or the BGM-109 Tomahawk, even though they are far lighter than 7,000 pounds. Bombers are the tool of the choice for carrying these weapons because they have the range and carrying capacity to use them well. Therefore, the F-15EX is a terrible tool for such a task. It would have a pretty short leg with 1-2 of such missile, and at best 2 or maybe with only a single drop tank.
Stealth aircraft cannot do this.
It is worth noting that it is very likely that such missiles would be carried by the B-2 and the B-21 bombers, both of which are stealth planes. It would have been better if the video used the terminology stealth fighter instead of stealth aircraft. Carrying such heavy weaponry is the task of the bombers. Since it is far more cost efficient, one bomber can easily carry more than a fighter, and even a single tanker plane can extend the combat radius of any long-range bomber into 10,000 km range. The F-15 is not the correct tool for such a long-range mission, and the specific cost of carrying hypersonic missile for a given range would be prohibitively high compared to a bomber. Strategic assets are not deployed all around the world because of logistics issues.
And so we start to see why resurrecting this old airframe and upgrading it is a smart move.
No, it does not. It is anything but a smart move. In fact, the situation is just the opposite. It is hard to find any reason to support the idea considering only the technical features of the F-15EX. So far, every argument and statement for the F-15EX in the video was ridiculously inaccurate or simply false.
Giving it a total capacity of 29,500 pounds of ordnance payload.
The 29,500 pounds carrying capacity is basically fantasy. Even if you loaded every hardpoint with the heaviest option available, you still can't reach this value. The internal fuel load is not a weapon, it does not count. Moreover, with a large and draggy loadout, the combat range of the aircraft would be reduced to insignificance. At this point, it can be safely stated that the video is filled with abundance of conflicting statements. It states the F-15EX is the fastest fighter with the heaviest loadout. These statements are complete contradictions. Even if the loadout weight was possible, it would not matter because carrying capacity does not determine the combat capability and survivability. Reality is not a baseball card game where the highest absolute number wins. With a very simple analogy, a Stone Age musket had larger caliber compared to an M16 rifle. Was it better the old musket just because it had larger caliber? No, it was not.
The F-15EX needs to be able to spot them first. Much like how armor is important to tanks, radar systems are important to aircraft survival.
This analogy does not make sense. Stealth is a more appropriate analogy for armor in this case, but it is far better than that. Beyond a certain point, long-range detection does not provide any advantage. Why is that? Because against stealth planes, long-range detection is not possible with radar. An F-15EX and a non-stealth Chinese plane can detect each other from over 100 km away. Longer detection range simply does not matter. What matters is the kinematic range of the missile, which is determined by the missile itself, and the launch altitude and speed, which is determined by the performance of the plane that carries it. In this area, stealth planes simply outclass the non-stealth planes because of their low drag achieved by having no external stores. They can fly in close to non-stealth planes without being detected and do so fast. How close and how fast? The S-35 can easily fly at Mach 1.5, the F-22 is even faster. Because of their stealth design, the MRAM missile can be launched within the no escape zone. This is the zone when even if the target turns back, places the missile at the 6 o'clock and uses maximum afterburner thrust, it cannot escape. The missile will reach the target. Defeating the missile kinematically by maneuvering is also far harder, because a missile reaches the target vicinity with higher kinetic energy reserves and is therefore able to perform high G-turns. The AN/APG-82 does not provide any advantage over the F-35 AN/APG-85 radar. They are from the same generation category. In the link in the description, there is an explanation from a pilot how brutal the F-22 in a fight against the F-15C. The result won't be different against the F-15EX because the same advantages such as stealth and supercruise still persist. The situation is similar if we change the F-22 to an S-35A.
Stealth is important, but if you can see the enemy first and your missiles outrange them, then it's also a key aspect in air-to-air combat.
As was explained just seconds ago, stealth provides the ability to first spot the enemy and utilize the true potential of an air-to-air missile. The F-15EX as a platform is simply inferior in the you can see the enemy first and outraging the opponent areas compared to a starfighter.
The F-15EX is also able to track and strike ground targets, which is a crazy capability in its own right. To do this, the EX uses the new Sniper Advanced Targeting Pod.
There is nothing crazy about it. The F-15EX would have the same weapons as the current F-15E in the USAF fleet. The GDAM family, the small diameter bomb, laser guided bombs. The S-35A also has the GDAM and the small diameter bomb, or even laser guided bombs if it is necessary. Even if the F-15EX had the AGM-88 harm, it is also considered outdated against the latest generation of double-digit SAMs. The S-35 has an integrated targeting tool, the EOTS. Even in stealth config, the S-35 has the same visual identification capability as any other plane with the sniper pod. The F-15EX does not have any advantage, moreover, the price of the plane does not include this pod. In case stealth is not needed, the S-35A is able to carry weapons and fuel tanks on external stores, therefore it does not make sense to claim that only the F-15EX can have both large range and significant firepower. Since most of the draggy loadout is carried internally by the F-35A and it does not need any pods, while the F-15EX need the sniper and the Legion pod to have data link to the F-22 and F-35.
The new F-15 will also have a huge combat range of almost 800 miles, which gives this aircraft the ability to intercept far away from where they were originally launched.
With the advertised 29,000 pound loadout, it never had. This is just another example of saying a large number clashes with the claim that it is the fastest fighter in the world. Another factor is the lack of stealth. In strike missions in a real contested airspace, where area denial SAMs are present, the F-15EX has to follow the terrain and fly at very low, which has a serious negative impact on its range. The Ukraine war has shown the survival chance against double-digit radar SAMs for non-stealth planes to be quite low.
It's critical for us to understand how cost-effective the new fighter will be.
To anyone with a cursory understanding of the topic, it is clearly evident that the F-15EX has a terrible cost-benefit ratio. Stealth is a game changer when it comes to the combat effectiveness and survivability of an aircraft. Even if the F-15EX was dirt cheap, it wouldn't matter when the lack of stealth limits its capabilities this much. Even if the aforementioned roughly $7,000 flight hour savings did exist, which is not backed up in the video with any data, who would pay for a plane which cannot operate in a modern, contested airspace and is at a major disadvantage against stealth planes?
Is that the F-15 has a 20,000 flight hour lifespan for its airframe when compared to the F-35's 8,000 flight hour lifespan. It also shares 75% of its parts in common with the old F-15 model already in use, meaning logistics supply chains are already in place and will largely stay the same.
On paper this is nice, but lifespan is just a plan. Originally the F-16s were not rated to fly more than 8,000 hours, while today there are F-16s with more than 9,000 flight hours. Considering how outdated non-stealth planes are, now this is simply an irrelevant marketing gimmick. Sim logistics and 75% parts commonality, but how? The F-15EX has the F-110 GE-129 engine, which has not been serviced in the United States Air Force F-15s yet. The existing F-15C and D planes have the F-100 Pratt & Whitney 220, as well as the 60% of the E models. Only 40% of the E models are equipped with the Dash 229 variant. The radar is also unique as well as its electronic warfare suite, if the F-15EX ever manufactured.
I'm just saying that the F-15 as an interceptor is a really great tool for dominating disputed airspace and has some key advantages. The F-15EX has this unique multi-role capability to target both air and ground targets.
Well, you have the right to say that, but none of the frequently contradictory statements in the video substantiates any of these claims. The F-15EX is not an interceptor and it is not a great tool compared to the S-35A. And it is anything but unique for a fighter to be multi-role in the 21st century. Even the over 30 years old but upgraded F-15E has basically the same precision strike capability. It has just been improved through the years. But the S-35 is also multi-role and it is a better multi-role fighter on every front.
This is especially significant for SEAD operations. What are SEAD operations? This is an Air Force concept of suppression of enemy air defenses.
Nope, a non-stealth plane is vastly inferior compared to a stealth plane for SEAD operations or SAM hunting. It is also worth noting that SEAD is an outdated Cold War era term in the era of multi-target channel SAMs. Multi-target channel capable SAMs cannot be suppressed. They can be saturated and killed by using lots of guided weapons, avoided or hit by chance during relocation and deployment.
The F-15 also has an advantage when it comes to the military buzzword of force multiplier. Its Legion pod allows it to pass off targeting data to another aircraft that is a better shot or is maybe within range. My understanding is the F-22 and F-35 can't do this.
Stealth is the real force multiplier and not the ridiculous 12 or 22 air-to-air missile loadouts or the claimed and false 29,000 pounds of ordnance. A force multiplier allows the better utilization of the already available weapons like the Embryo missile or the small diameter bomb. And your understanding is simply not accurate. The F-22 and the F-35A have a far more advanced data link that the F-15EX lacks. The Legion pod is necessary to be able to communicate with these more advanced fighters. We have reached the end of the video, and I can't help but conclude that it is astonishingly poorly made. In order to judge a fighter like the F-15EX and compare with other planes, you both need a background in physics to understand topics like radar and aerodynamics, as well as the willingness to actually properly research the topic. In fact, the video simply missed the singly justifiable reason for the F-15EX. Boeing is in financial crisis because of the incidents with the Boeing 737 MAX. If Boeing had to close its fighter department, in the future Lockheed Martin would have monopoly. This acquisition can help to keep it future competition in strange way. But even this move is a bit strange, to acquire more plane for the US Air Force, which since a decade has a pilot shortage. About 2,000 pilots missing from the staff. So to speak, the F-15EX is not a bad plane compared to other very advanced 4++ generation jets, just the F-35A is much better fighter plane overall with lower price tag. To make the F-15EX happen, the Boeing got a helping hand and the US Air Force have got some diversity. The latter means if for example the F-35A fleet grounded for some reason, the F-15EX, besides the other F-15, F-16 and F-22 planes, still can use an everyday roles. The F-15EX got some unbiased love in several media coverage, yet most of these have quite a lot of factual errors, as you can see. If you like the video, you can share, like, subscribe or ring the bell and follow the channel. You can support it via Patreon for exchange for early access video, voting on plan topics, and extra content is available and regular updates about the projects. So far, 8 extra documents were released, their description is in the link under the video.